Few names are as notorious as Margaret Campbell, the Duchess of Argyll, whose life was a tornado of money, beauty, and scandal. As the Dirty Duchess, her reputation was forever tarnished when her ex-husband Ian Campbell, the 11th Duke of Argyll, found a drawer full of explicit photos and love letters about her secret affairs with 90 men, including politicians and celebrities. This shocking discovery shocked British high society and led to a public divorce lawsuit. Margaret Campbell's narrative still shocks and captivates, showing her complex life of secrets and deceit. Explore the life of a beautiful lady consumed by her position and ultimately destroyed. Born with a silver spoon. Born December 1, 1912 in Newton Mearns, Renfrewshire, Scotland, Ethel Margaret Wigham was the only child of Scottish businessman George Hay Wigham, the chairman of the Celanese Corporation of Britain and North America, and Helen Mann Haney. The Wigham family relocated to New York City shortly after the girl was born, and she would spend the next 14 years of her childhood attending various prestigious private institutions, including the renowned Hewitt School. Margaret would spend time there with some of her day's wealthiest, most innovative, and most accomplished heirs and heiresses. Young love. Margaret was so beautiful as a teenager that she attracted the attention of males far older than herself and those her age. Wigham relished the attention and felt unique as the focus of their attention. During their summer vacation on the Isle of Wight in 1928, 15-year-old Wigham and 18-year-old David Niven, who would go on to become an award-winning British actor, met. Although their guardians and parents were occupied enjoying their holiday, David and Margaret found time to get into a little amount of mischief that would have a lasting effect on their lives. Teen Mom. Not only was Margaret's experience with Niven the night she lost her virginity, but it was also the night she got pregnant. The beautiful adolescent heiress would experience lousy luck on the first night she felt fortunate, as a few months later, Wigham would learn she was expecting a child. For the daughter of a successful businessman, however, this meant immediate notoriety and potential damage to her family's image should the news ever get out. Like many other soon-to-be teenage moms, this would undoubtedly generate stress and disagreement within the family. The secret's out. Wigham made a bold choice since being an unmarried mother in the early 1900s was a terrible experience. She eventually confessed to her parents not just about her frolic in the hay with Niven, but also about the scandalous result of her evening's actions. Margaret's parents were unhappy with the news, and one of the household maids said that all hell broke loose, with Margaret's father visibly distraught. After the first shock subsided, Margaret's parents realized what their only option would be. Secret operation. The Wigham family did not want news of their daughter's disgraceful activities to get out to the public, since they were highly esteemed in many English social circles. After deciding on a course of action, the family packed Margaret's possessions and transported her to a nursing facility in London, where medical professionals would carry out a very discreet abortion. Margaret kept the choice to end her pregnancy so private that she neglected to include it in her memoirs, which were published over 50 years later. Even while this was undoubtedly a sad and painful experience, it was nothing compared to what would happen to her later in life. Playing the field. 2 years after her covert operation, Margaret resumed her life when her parents introduced her as a debutante at London's court. The family's declaration would be very beneficial since it effectively said that their daughter was available, prepared to socialize and settle down, even if Margaret had already done so. Margaret was being well treated by age and maturity since the stunning brunette had continued to blossom in beauty. Margaret would be declared the court's debutante of the year after the season, despite the advances of many males. Unfortunately, Margaret's ability to date almost any guy would get her in trouble since she was meant to be looking for a partner for marriage and a family, and she preferred to accept advances from powerful men. The Other Woman. In their pursuit of Margaret Wigham, Prince Ali Khan and pilot Glenn Kidston would be the two men who would stand out. Though Kidston would be the object of Prince Ali Khan's attention, the young beauty would get several presents and tokens of appreciation from him. Kidston was married and had a little kid, but that didn't stop Margaret from pursuing her dream of becoming a homewrecker and becoming London's answer to Helen of Troy. Kidston's marriage was doomed to fail till her beloved passed away, tragically. Kidston would perish in 1931 when his aircraft was practically torn apart under him while flying during a dust storm. This caused extreme sadness for Margaret and Kidston's family, with one handling it better than the other. On the rebound. Going from one relationship to another after a split or partner's death may be an emotionally charged and dangerous task. Some people are fortunate enough to discover happiness straight away, while others find themselves in a maze of different relationships. After Kidston's untimely death, Wigham soon became betrothed to Charles Greville, the very rich Earl of Warwick. Although this would only sometimes be seen as problematic, Margaret's acceptance of publishing scion Max Aiken's proposal soon after would set off a series of more problems and controversies. Options. Margaret Wigham had two men promise her their undying love and devotion, but instead of picking one, she threw a massive curveball at them. After shoving both men aside, Margaret focused on Charles Sweeney, a successful businessman from Pennsylvania who was also a passionate amateur golfer. Naturally, Wigham was not prepared to become a happy wife and mother. Instead, she planned to exploit the impending nuptials as an opportunity to stir up even more controversy. Dressed for success. Wigham, well known for her immaculate taste and elegance, sparked speculation about her wedding gown when news spread to the broader public about her impending nuptials to Sweeney. Margaret's Norman Hartnell-designed bridal gown attracted so much attention from the public that it blocked traffic in Knightsbridge and the surrounding region for 3 hours. Margaret was not at her happiest as Wigham walked down the aisle hand in hand with her new husband, even though she seemed to be the center of attention for all of England. Married with children. Margaret and Charles, like most young couples, dreamed of a happy married life with kids running around the home. That ambition, however, would soon become a nightmare as she would struggle to conceive with her husband and have an agonizing 8 miscarriages, despite the ease with which she fell pregnant as a teenager. Margaret would ultimately get pregnant, but this too would end tragically when she gave birth to a stillborn daughter in 1933 at the age of 8 months. With a strong desire to procreate, the couple had a daughter, Frances, in 1937 and a son, Charles, in 1940. Life-changing moment. Margaret had experienced more personal, direct and indirect catastrophes in her late 20s than most individuals would have to endure in their lifetime. Margaret would have a bizarre accident where she would fall 40 feet down an elevator shaft when she was seeing her doctor. Luckily, Margaret was alive and comparatively uninjured when rescue workers discovered her after the dust had settled. Her bleeding and ripped fingernails suggested, according to Sweeney, that the doctors thought she could have grasped onto the elevator rope to halt her fall. "I fell onto my knees and cracked the back of my head against the wall," Margaret would later note. A changed woman. Margaret would need more than 30 sutures in her head while she healed in the hospital, and only then would she be permitted to go back to her family's house. That being said, Charles, her husband, saw something different in his wife and not an apparent injury. Margaret had changed from the lady he had married years before, becoming unpredictable, impetuous, and frighteningly possessing nymphomaniac tendencies. 4 years after Margaret's injury in 1947, the couple filed for divorce due to the behavioral shift in Margaret. As Margaret put it, all Charlie wanted in a wife was a pretty, brainless doll. Charlie was an excessively controlling spouse. On the prowl. Despite being a mother of 2, Margaret was now free to go out and date anyone, whenever and wherever the chance presented itself. It wasn't like Margaret had to settle for regular Joes from the middle class because of her gorgeous appearance. Margaret, who had 2 little children, briefly hooked up with and became engaged to Joseph Thomas, a wealthy Texas banker, before he dumped her for another lady. Theodore Rousseau, the curator of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and Margaret later dated until their breakup because of Margaret's opinion that he didn't deserve to become a stepfather. Head over heels. Margaret would eventually move on from her past relationships and meet a guy she would be madly in love with. Ian Duncan Campbell, popularly known as the Duke of Argyll, was a strikingly gorgeous Scottish man with a gruff attitude and imposing features that gave him a picturesque, Byronic hero appearance. Campbell had a dark side to match his physical attributes, and he lived in a mansion worthy of a man of his grandeur at Inverarray Castle. Margaret should have been concerned about Campbell's last two marriages because he was well known for being a heavy drinker, gambler, and abuser of prescription drugs. He was also said to have abused both of his wives. Wigham would go headlong into problems instead of dodging them. Second chance. Margaret, who had already experienced one unsuccessful marriage, would wed Ian Campbell on March 22, 1951. After their marriage, Margaret would formally assume the title of Duchess of Argyll, a position that many believed would make her the most famous person alive. Once again the talk of the town, Margaret had a royal life and a strong husband, and she was still the envy of many because of her gorgeous appearance and sense of style. But from the beginning, Margaret's second marriage was not all that it was talked up to be. Ulterior motives. Wigham should have known better than to marry Campbell unless she'd been living under a rock, but for some people, status and fortune speak louder than anything else. The Duke took advantage of his new wife immediately after the marriage contract's ink dried. Ian Campbell started stealing money from the Duchess and exchanging it for other things from his house. He planned to use the money to buy back his family seat at the Inverarray Castle. Despite Campbell's wealth, influence, and good looks, being his wife was like working with the devil. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Margaret Campbell always had a peculiar attitude, despite all the terrible experiences she had during her life, such as problems with her pregnancy, broken relationships, and tumbling down an elevator shaft. Campbell, who often called herself a bird brain and always vain, seemed more concerned with her appearance than anybody else, and most of her acquaintances thought she had no sense of humor regarding her relationships. No fun zone. Evidence that Margaret may not have had a sense of humor. On one occasion, a guest picked up a cushion and said, "What a fun party, Margaret, let's swap gossip." Margaret sent the lady a strange look and said, "It's not that sort of party," clearly missing the satirical overtones of her statement. Margaret turned to face the cushion and continued, "And it's not that cushion." Given her constant gloomy demeanor, self-centeredness, and a special knack for finding herself in scandalous situations, it should be no surprise that Margaret didn't have many friends. Nothing special. Margaret would quickly conclude that her marriage to the Duke of Argyll was a mistake. Although the marriage elevated her social standing, it came at a price for one of the world's most attractive ladies, who had many eligible men lusting for her. There would be other accounts of Ian Campbell's treatment of his wife, including ones in which he bullied, intimidated, and degraded her. It became apparent that this relationship was poisonous and that Margaret was at her wit's end when she was mistreated further and struggled to conceive once again. Diabolical plan. At her breaking point, the Duchess retaliated. Margaret began to make cheap jabs at her husband's two boys from his marriage to Louise Timpson when she felt uncomfortable about being unable to conceive again. Margaret falsified documents claiming Ian and Colin were not genuine. Although she had devised the scheme to protect her authority, it eventually failed. However, don't believe that one misguided strategy would stop Margaret. She continued to strive, despite realizing that money could not purchase true happiness. Margaret repeatedly tried to get individuals to sell her their newborn baby as part of her scheme to get even with her husband, believing that by doing so, she would be able to persuade everyone, including her husband, that the child was her own. Then her son would succeed her as the Duke's legal heir. Trust issues. Ian and Margaret Campbell had various marital issues. When the wife returned home late at night and became more aloof in their relationship, the Duke of Argyll eventually grew so suspicious of her and her habit of cheating on her husband that he would take things into his own hands. Ian would wiretap his wife's automobile so he could always know exactly where she was, since he didn't feel he could trust her. There would be more instances of Campbell violating his wife's privacy. In the family home, Margaret kept a closed private drawer, secret from her husband, who would become quite irrational over what was within it. Ian would contact a locksmith to open his wife's Pandora box when Margaret was visiting New York. Intimate photos. Margaret's first husband, Charles Sweeney, would later claim that the accident caused his wife to become a sex-crazed person after she fell down the elevator shaft. Ian would learn the truth after the locksmith forced Margaret's drawer open. Many very private and suggestive photos were among the things concealed within. Margaret's face was mostly obscured or cropped from the disturbing images of her in different degrees of undress and intimate poses. But there was one obvious clue that the Duke could use to identify his wife. She was wearing her beloved three-string pearl necklace in several of the images. Making the rounds. Finding images of the Duchess of Argyll in different stages of nakedness alarmed Ian, but that wasn't the worst aspect of discovering the locked-up images. His wife engaged in sexual activity with other males in several of the pictures. Like her face, the males in the other photos had their heads cropped out of focus or blurry, making it almost difficult to tell who they were. Ian was furious with his wife for cheating, and at first he only wanted to look at the photos. Eventually, however, he decided to take action and filed for divorce. The Duke of Argyll would fabricate a tale that his wife had slept with close to 90 different men throughout their marriage over the next several months. Fighting fire with fire. Having proof of her adultery at hand, Margaret would refute her husband's accusations with anecdotal evidence. The Duchess of Argyll made the perverse claim that the Duke had cheated on her too, but with a different lady. Margaret accused her husband of having an affair with Jane Corby Wigham, her stepmother. This was a poorly considered strategy since, until the day of the hearing, Margaret could not locate even one witness to support her story, which forced her to withdraw the accusations. She lost her reputation and social standing due to this, and she also had to pay her stepmother £25,000 to settle a separate libel and slander claim. What's in a name? Given the Duke and Duchess of Argyll's social standing, any legal processes, including a divorce, would undoubtedly become a significant public news event. All bets seemed to be off when the tabloids learned of the obscene details of their divorce. Numerous accounts of Margaret's immoral actions over the 4 years that Ian and Margaret fought one another in court led to Margaret being dubbed the Dirty Duchess. Now that the world had access to her images, the moniker the media bestowed upon Margaret seemed appropriate, as the collection's most notorious images showed her knelt before a headless nude male, seemingly engaging in a sexual act. Who's the man? Despite Ian Campbell's and the press's best efforts, the individual's identity in the photo still needs to be discovered today. With 18 possible partners, it became a significant task for the media to identify the one in issue. One of the leading contenders who shared a past with Margaret was Duncan Sandys, the British Minister of Defense and the future son-in-law of Winston Churchill. Sandys resigned, even though he was never shown to be the guy in issue when his name was added to the list of Margaret's lovers. Weeding out the possibilities. Several historians have identified 5 prominent contenders who matched the guy's profile in the image. However, there was additional evidence that specifically mentioned Douglas Fairbanks Jr. Despite being a father of 3 and married to his second wife, rumors circulated that the Hollywood star had an extramarital affair with the Duchess of Argyll. Fairbanks Jr.'s name was kept a secret for a while by his lawyers and agents, but reporters thought the handwriting on the Polaroid photos was identical to the actors. Margaret deserves praise for remaining silent about the identities of the 88 men, despite claims that some of them were homosexual men who needed further proof. Final judgment. Britain was in a different condition of societal acceptability than it is now in the early to mid-1900s. It was evident that Margaret did not favor the ultra-conservative Lord John Thomas Wheatley, who was overseeing Ian and Margaret's divorce case. Judge Wheatley would bitterly characterize the Duchess of Argyll as a wholly immoral and completely promiscuous woman when the divorce was ultimately granted. The judge's snide remarks in his parting speech finally destroyed Margaret's reputation. Although her identity was tarnished and had little to no value in the public eye, she was legally free to live her life as she pleased. Fall from grace. Margaret Campbell had everything at one time in her life: gorgeous beauty, wealth, celebrity, and support from family and the public. One would imagine that she may have been pardoned and that her reputation would gradually improve as free love gained acceptance on a global scale. Sadly, this was untrue, and Margaret did little to improve the circumstances. Margaret, desperate for cash, wrote a book titled Forget Not. People didn't want to accept Margaret's most recent attempt to repair her reputation, even though the Duke of Argyll was no saint. They deemed the book offensive and full of name-dropping. Making a quick buck. Although her book failed, it would have been a shocking hit if Margaret had identified her headless lover. She never gave up trying to earn money. Regretfully, her tactics remained a little offensive. She had an idea to charge admission to the public for tours of her house on Upper Grosvenor Street, where Ian Campbell had discovered the locked drawer and the infamous pictures that led to Margaret Wigham's demise. Treat others how you want to be treated. Margaret would lose not only her reputation, social standing, and money, but also her dignity and even her individuality. Many of her former acquaintances said that Margaret only trusted her dogs apart from her close family. One of her maids told people who asked to see evidence of her conduct that Wigham would treat her dogs better than her employees. Margaret was among those asking for confirmation. Margaret would lose out on several residences and destroy her relationship with coworkers and friends. Margaret would downsize to a primary apartment building after leaving Inverary Castle, the Upper Grosvenor House, and a room at the Grosvenor House Hotel. New beginning. Margaret was a 70-year-old woman still struggling to make ends meet. The Dirty Duchess continued to establish herself as a celebrity despite her controversies, appearing on chat programs like After Dark. Wigham acknowledged that she went on the program to put the point of view of the horse while talking about the Grand National Horse Race, even though she still conducted herself as an upper-class member. However, as is usually the case with Margaret, there was controversy when she left the program during the broadcast, claiming that she was so sleepy. Final days. Margaret Wigham was 80 years old and unable to care for herself in the early 1990s, so her children put her in a care facility. On July 25, 1993, Margaret suffered a catastrophic break to her neck after a severe fall while using the restroom. In contrast to her elevator tragedy, the injuries would be too great to treat, ultimately resulting in her death. Margaret had such a colorful and scandalous life that her memory would endure long after her death. A Very British Scandal, starring Claire Foy as Margaret Wigham and Paul Bettany as Ian Campbell, was published by Amazon in 2022. It recounts her historic court struggle with the Duke of Argyll, all rights reserved. Words to live by. Margaret Wigham Campbell was preoccupied with being seen as a higher class member, despite the many hardships she had to face. Margaret was well known for her affection for jewelry and animals. Her famous comment, "Always a poodle, only a poodle," that and 3 strands of pearls, together they're the essential things in life, offered some basic understanding of what mattered in her life. The original Cole Porter song "You're the Top" lyrics read, "You're the top, you're an arrow collar, you're the top, you're a Coolidge dollar, you're the nimble tread in the feet of Fred Astaire, you're Mussolini, you're Miss Sweeney, you're Miss Camembert." Margaret, for better or ill, left her mark on the world. If you've watched the video till here, that means you've enjoyed the video. Subscribe. Don't forget to turn on the notifications bell icon